We'll do a review. Lakut Sichas and Chelek Yudches, the fourth Sicha for the Parshas Korach. Very interesting Nigla Sicha, a discussion the Rebbe has in the beginning of Maseches Midos, how to straighten out the Rambam's interpretation, the commentary. It seems like the Rambam is going like two opinions, which really disagree with each other, and the Rambam sort of seems to combine them. And the Rebbe explains this very, very well in a lumdish way, sort of to speak. So let's look inside. So of course, it says in the Parashas Korach, it says that the Levim were the ones that were in charge of guarding the Mishkan. So and the Kohanim. So b'shayches to their mitzvah for Shmiras Migdosh, as it relates to the mitzvah of guarding the Beis Hamikdash, and that was done durch the Kohanim and Levim, both through the Kohanim and Levim. Welcome is the Stavig in unser Parsha, in which they were commanded about this mitzvah of guarding the Mikdash in our Parsha. So Zog the Mishnah, so the Mishnah says like this, in Onei Mesachas Midos, the beginning of Tractate Midos. So it says like this: that in the Beis Hamikdash, there were three places that the Kohanim, they are the ones that guarded that. But the Levim and the Levim guarded the Esrim Ve'echad Moker. They had 21 places. Specifically, of the 21 places, the Mishnah mentions that Chamisha al Chamisha Shari Hazor. Five of the 21 places was on the five entrances, the gates that entered to the Azorah. They had a Shomer, a Levi, watching those entrances. So that's 5 of those 21. Seems like when you read it in very Pashtus, it seems like this Mishnah seems to indicate that there were only 5 gates to enter into the Azorah, because it just says the 5 on the 5 gates of the Azorah. Seems like there were 5 gates in the Azorah. However, in Ashpeter Dike Mishnah, later on, the Mishnah later on, Shteit Ober, it says Shiva Shorim Hoyu Ba'Azorah. There were 7 gates in the Azorah. The Mishnah details the exact names of the different 7 gates, not 5. As is given, there were not 5 as in the first Mishnah, but there were 7. So, how does the Gemara? The Gemara gives 2 answers in this question. If the Kasha entered the Gemara, it's on this question, they will have 2 answers in the Gemara. Amar Abaye said that Trei Minayu from the Shiva Shorim, that 2 of these 7 gates in other words, really there were 7 gates. And there is no disagreement here between the first Mishnah says 5 gates, over there it says 7 gates. There's no dispute over here how many gates there were. The Mishnah, according to Abaye, why does it say 5 gates? Because only 5 out of the 7 needed to guard. So the Mishnah is only mentioning that they guarded in 5 places. So really there was 7 gates, like it says in the second Mishnah, and guarding was only done in 5 of them. Amar Abaye, Trei Minayu for the Yeshiva She'orim, 2 of the 7, Lo Tzrichi Shimur, they didn't need to be guarded. As we'll see later on, the Kahanim were in those Batim, and they automatically guarded them as well, so they didn't need Shimur. Und der Far zog der Tanner as the Shmira is not al Chamisha. That's why the Tanner, the beginning of Midas, the first mission said there was only 5 Shari Azorah, because only 5 gates needed Shimur. But there is no dispute how many gates there was. So everybody agrees that both Mishnahs that there were 7 gates. And the reason why the first Mishnah said that they guarded on 5 gates, because only 5 out of the 7 needed Shmur. That's the opinion of Abaye. But the Rava says no. The Rava Martanoi. that this is actually a disagreement of the Tanoim. The two Mishnahs disagree. The Ikotana the Omar Shiva, the Ikotana the Omar Chamisha. There's one Tana that says there were 7, and there's another Tana that said there were 5. So basically, the second answer, Rava's answer, he says no, there wasn't 7. According to the first Mishnah, there were only 5 gates, and that's why the 5 gates were guarded. According to the second Mishnah, there were 7 gates. Perhaps these 7 gates were guarded. Over there, the Mishnah is not talking about were they guarded; it just says over there that there were 7 gates. But the first Mishnah, so the Pashtus, we'll see. This will be the discussion here. The Pashtus, the way we approach this is because over here there says that there were 5 and they guarded 5. That means they guarded all the 5. And actually, the other Mishnah that says that they had 7 gates, that's what we understand. That Rava says that there's another Mishnah that says 7, means that they guarded the 7 gates. And so they had to guard all the gates that were there, according to both Mishnahs, but depending on how many gates. According to the first one, there were 5 gates. According to the other one, there were 7 gates. That's the way you would see Mechatchila, the Pashtus. So, but the Rambam and Yad HaChazoke bring a rope from Beide Mishnahs. The Rambam, the Yad HaChazoke, he brings both Mishnahs. So, Aleph, he brings down from the second Mishnah, V'shiva Shorim Hoyulo. He says there were 7 gates. And number 2, Beis, he brings down from the first Mishnah, Ve'echin Hoyu Halvim Shorim. Where were they guarding? So he says, B'chamisha Shari Azorah, that they were guarding, there were 7 gates, and they were guarding only 5 of the 7 gates of the Azor. And he gives the reason. Why were they only watching on 5? Why is it only, if there is 7, how come they watched it only on 5? So he says, Shaharei HaKohanim Shoimrim al Shar HaMoiked Bal Shar HaNitzutz. Since the Kohanim, they were in the Moiked and the Shar HaNitzutz, so they were watching those gates, as we'll see later on. They were watching, they were in the homes, in the Beis HaMoiked, in the Beis HaNitzutz. And because they were there, they were already watching the gates as well. So there was no need for those 2 gates to be watched. So, what does this mean? Let's haste. This means that the Rambam learned with the teretz from Abaye. This is what Abaye said. Abaye said that that you didn't need to watch them because everybody agrees, according to Abaye, that there were 7 gates. And why did the Mishnah say only 5 by us have to watch? Because we didn't have to be guarded. That goes like Abaye. I says Nitokim Plupta Mishnahs. So there is no disagreement. It says clearly there are 7 gates and 5 of them were watched. So Istamua. So then that's a surprise. Why would the Rambam, Fabos Paskin, the Rambam via Abaye, why does he rule like Abaye? So Chaklal as Abaye v'Rav Aloch Kirov. When there's a disagreement, Abaye v'Rav Aloch Kirov. So it seems like that the Rambam should have said like Rava. What does Rava say? Rava said there is a machlokes, and the way we understand the machlokes to be that according to the first Mishnah they watched 5 gates because there was only 5 gates. According to the second Mishnah there were 7 gates, so they watched 7 gates. But the Rambam says that there were 7 gates. They only watched 1. That there's no machlokes between the 2 Mishnah. How come the Rambam chooses to learn like Abaye's interpretation, not like Rava? When usually the halacha is like Rava against Abaye. Again, it seems like when we learn the Pashtus in the Gemara, that according to Rava, the second Mishnah holds that there were 7 gates and they watched it in 7 places. And only the first Mishnah says that they had 5 gates, and that's why they watched it in 5 places. The Rambam says, no, there were 7 gates, and they only watched it in 5 because 2 of them didn't need to be watched. And that fits with the second, that fits with the interpretation of Abaye. How could Abaye, he looked like Abaye against him? Further, we'll see, as the Rebbe will explain, that actually Rava never meant, Rava doesn't disagree, to be the Chiddush of the Rebbe, that the Rava doesn't disagree on the idea that you only watched 5 of them. Even though Rava says that they're disputing how many gates there were, that's the dispute. Rava's Chiddush, that the dispute between the 2 Mishnahs that Rava suggests is only suggesting the dispute is how many gates there were, whether there were 5 gates or 7 gates. But the Rava doesn't dispute the fact that they only watched 5 of the 7 gates. So really, Rava goes to Abaye. According to Abaye, he says that there were 7. According to Abaye, there were in the first Mishnah there were 7 gates, and only 5 of them needed to be watched. And according to Rava, our Mishnah holds there was only 5 gates. According to Abaye, saying this now because this will be important later on to understand the Rebbe's Chiddush over here. And okay, maybe we'll just wait. But the point here is that according to Abaye, we learned that both opinions hold that there are 7 gates. First Mishnah, second Mishnah. And according to Rava, the first Mishnah holds there was 5 gates, and according to the 7 gates, as we'll see later on. Okay, this maybe I confused more than I helped, but let's go move on to Sikha. Base. In Pirush HaMishnah Zog the Rambam, in the Pirush HaMishnah, the Rambam states, as those was state in their Mishnah, that it states in the Mishnah. Chamisha al Chamisha Sharia Azora. This is the first Mishnah. That the 5 places that the Levim guarded was the 5 gates of the Azora. Is es ledas Tanakam. That's the opinion of the Tanakam. 5. Lefi sheyesh min atanoyim mi she'omar chamisha she'orim hoyul Azora. Clearly, that there is one of the Tanoim. This is the first Mishnah that holds that there's only 5 gates to the Azora. That's it. Vehu hamedaber kan, and he is the one that is speaking over here in the Mishnah of Midos, the first Mishnah of Midos. But the Yeshmehem, there's other Shomar Zayin. It's the second Mishnah that says there's 7. Vihidas Rabbi, and that's the majority opinion that there were 7. Oladas hachachomim. But according to the Chachomim, whether there were 5 or whether there were 7, according to the Chachomim, Hoya hamishmar al chamisha she'orim menashim. Clearly, while there is a dispute and there's a Tana that holds that there were 7, but only 5 of the 7 were guarded by the Levi. Isn't it Mubah? It's not understood. The Rambam heeft on zu verantworten die Stire von der später Dicke Mishnah. The Rambam starts the Pirush HaMishnayos to try to answer the contradiction. Here it says 5. And the next Mishnah states Shiva Shorim Bazora. So what does he answer? He starts answering with Tirus from Rava, with Rava's answer, by saying that the first one and the second one is a machlokes. So what do we think? The first one holds the guarded on 5. There were 5 gates and the guarded by 5. And the second one, that's the second answer of Rava, Oh, there were 7 gates, and therefore they guarded by 7. That's what one would expect. He says, as this is a plukta from Tanoim. Tanoi, this is a machlokes of Tanoim. Whether they guarded at 5 or they guarded at 7. That's what it seems like. Und der Tana von der Mishnah halt as Chamisha. Our Tana also were 5 of the first Mishnah. The Rambam, the Mishnah Pirush was nice. They explained the first Mishnah. He also were 5. So that's his stuff. When he's Messiah, and how does he conclude the Rambam? Kishita Zabaya. He's the Lagabaya. As oich loidem Tana as Shiva Shorim Hoyim Azora. So even though we're saying there may be 7 gates, is the Shmira blois given of Chamisha Shorim min Hashiva. So the guarding was only done at 5 out of the 7. So if we say, this is like Abaye says that 5 out of the 7 were guarded. So in other words, we don't have to say that there is a machlokes. So basically, they can all hold that there are 7, as the Mashma, like Abaye explains in our Gemara, that there were 7. And why does our Mishnah, first Mishnah, say 5? Because they only guarded 5. Why does it say in the other Mishnah that there were 7? Because there were actually 7 gates. So why does the Rambam have to say, therefore, that there is a machlokes? When he starts saying there is a machlokes, it almost seems that goes like Rava. And Rava says that in the first Mishnah holds the guarded at 5, the second at 7. But then he says no. Then he says like Abaye, that even if we say that there were 7 gates, they only guarded at 5, and that's the first Mishnah. Musma Zogum. So we have to say, as the Rambam learned Oich Loit Rava, that the Rambam learns that even Rava was Zoktanoyi. So Rava says there is a machlokes whether there were 5 gates or there were 7 gates. It doesn't mean that the Rava holds that they were guarding at 7 gates. The Eichlich Rava Vazoktanoi is the pluk the blois and misparashorim. They're only disagreeing how many gates there were. There is no dispute about the guarding of the gates. Everybody agrees. Abaye, Rava agrees to Abaye that they only guarded 5. The only thing he's saying that there is a machlokes how many gates there were, but not how many they guarded. They guarded even according to Rava that says that there is a machlokes. It doesn't mean there's a machlokes how many they guarded. There's a machlokes how many gates there were. But guarded, they only guarded 5 of the 7. The Tana for the Erste Mishnah holds, Tana first Mishnah holds as Zanigiven Nur Chamisha Shorim. That's where the machlokes is according to Rava. First one holds was 5 gates. Zanigiven Nur Chamisha. Ubemele is the Shmiri Given Nur Chamisha Razora. So if there was only 5, that's where they guarded. There wasn't more. The Tana for the Zweite Mishnah holds, the Tana for the second Mishnah, there's Zog Befedish Ashiva Shorim Oyibazor. There were 7 gates. So that's. But it is over Moida as the Shmir is given no Reb Chamish Shorim, but he agrees that the Chamish was only 5 gates. But Trei 2 don't need Shimmer. So basically, it's all the Rambam goes. Pirush all goes like Rava, and even according to Rava, there were only in 5 places that they guarded, not in 7, even though there were 7 gates. But Trei Menayu Shimmer. Abaye held. What does Abaye hold? Abaye holds that even our Tana holds that there were 7. First Tana holds that there were 7, and since the 2 didn't require shimmer, so there's only 7. Everybody agrees there were 7 shorim. Abaye held us talking machlokes klal. There's no machlokes at all. Allah held not shiva shorim. Everybody holds there were 7 gates. And 2 out of the 7 is shimmer. This is according to everybody. So now what does it boil down to? That according to Rava, there is a machlokes how many gates there were, but still they only guarded 5. And according to Abaye, there's no machlokes how many gates there were. There were 7 according to everybody. and still they only guarded 5. The myth is for entweder for was the Rambam Pascha that the Shmir is given of Chamisha Shari HaZorah. So now we understand why the Rambam rules that the guarding was on the 5. Shari Koinim Shemrim Chulu. So we said before with the Tiris for Abaya that they were guarding it also because the Kohanim, like Abaya said, they didn't need Shimur because they were guarded by the Kohanim. Because Rava doesn't disagree with that. But even according to Rava, even the Tana that says there were 7 gates, who disagrees with the first Tana according to Rava? First Tana holds there was only 5 gates. The second Tana has that is 7 gates, but he too agrees that they only guarded in 5 places. That's what the Rambam said. The Rambam is not really saying like Shittas Abayi, he's saying Abayi's answer, because that goes according to Rava too. The Rambam Paskin did the Tana, Nidver, the Tana was held Chamisha. He rules like Rava Take, that holds that there were 7. Like Rava said, there is a dispute, and he rules like the second had 7. But Dosi Das Rabbi, there's not the because that's the majority of the opinion. It's also the opinion of Rava, as he says in the Pirush Shnais. But then the question that Rebbe says, but we need to understand then. So why would then why do we therefore have to say that there's a machlokes since according to Rava you only guarded it in 5 places anyways, even if we say Shiva? So the Gemara asks the question. Here it says 7, there it says 5, but here we're talking the first Mishnah says you're guarding it in 5 places. So and Rabbi also agrees that you only guarded it in 5 places. So why does Rabbi have to say that our Mishnah holds that there's only 5 gates? And the other Mishnah is a dispute. Rabbi, they hold that there were 7 gates. And our Mishnah holds you only watched the Levim in the 5 gates because there was only 5 gates. And the other Mishnah holds that there was really 7 gates, and they still watched only 5 of them because the 2 didn't need to be watched. Why doesn't he just say like Abaye says that there's 7 gates, there's no machlekes, and in the Mishnah, the first Mishnah told me that says they were guarding of 5 gates because only 5 of the 7 would need to be guarded. That's what he says it later. Gimel. Of the beers this explanation is surprising. About as Lloyd Rav is the Tokis to the Beidin Yonim. Since also according to Rav, there is no contradiction between these 2 aspects. It's possible that Shiva Shorim Hoyimazon, there could have been 7. Von deswegen is the Shmira Noran Chamish Sharazor, and then you only watch 5. We're saying that the Rav holds that. That's how we're explaining the Rambam. So, what is the hechrich for Rav to say? Why is Rav forced to say Tanoi? Well, to say machlekes Tanoi. As the Erste Mishnah is saying holds that Chamisha Azora, when it says that the 5 guards were taking place by the 5 gates of the Azora, can it come with the Tana of the Zweite Mishnah cannot go like the Tana of the second Mishnah that said there were 7 gates. With the Tana of the Zweite Mishnah, he says there were 7 gates. So we're saying, well, they can't work it out. The Abaye like Abaye says that he also holds 7, but they only watch the 5. That's what Abaye says. The Rava says no. The Mus Haltnas Chamisha. Why does Abaye Rava insist that the Tanu that says Chamisha has to hold that it's 5? And the Rava says that Miya Hanal. The surprise is noch mer boilet in Pirush HaMishnayos. It more sticks out at you the Pirush HaMishnayos. But Zog Beidin Yorim B'chot HaMachzak. He says both things together, as mentioned earlier. Aleph, he says the Tana from the Erste Mishnah halt Chamisha Shonim Oilazor. He says he holds that it's 5 gates to the Azora, which is like Rava says. There's a disagreement. Base. He also says also the Chachamim that say there were 7 gates. They also hold that there was only 5 of the 7. The Baal Since that also to the opinion of Chachamim, the guard was on the 5 gates. The Mishnah al Chamisha Shari Azores. So why does the Rambam have to interpret the Mishnah? The first Mishnah told me that they were guarding 5 gates. There was Halt Chamisha Shari Moil Azora. Why do we have to say that it goes like that opinion? Why shouldn't we say like that the Mishmar was on the Chamisha Shari, but there were 7 gates. They only watched 5 of them. As the Rambam learns himself in the Yad HaChazak. So, we interpreted that the Rava also holds, when we learned the Gemara in the Pashtus, not with the Rambam, we thought that when the Rambam, as many gates, that's how much the Levim had to guard. But the Rambam made a combination, even though the Rambam passed on the 7 gates, and still he says he only guarded 5 gates. So that's even according to the view of Rava, which is the halacha like Rava, the Das Rabbi. So now we don't understand why does Abaye and Rava disagree. Why doesn't the Rava learn that the Mishnah that says they guarded 5 is like the Rabbi that says that there were 7 gates and they only watched 5 of the 7, so everything fits. Why do we have to go ahead and make a machlokes over here and say that first of all, why are we saying that Mishnah holds that there were 5 and it argues on the second? And why does the Rambam that says 7? We can say, why can't the Rambam say that there's 1? And why does the Rambam, who brings out the Das Rabbim, have to say that the Mishnah goes against the halacha? Why not say there's 7 and like the Rabbim, and they only guarded 5 of the 7? Why does he have to get involved by saying that there is a machlokes over here? The Rebbe will learn, the Rebbe will figure the end, that actually this whole machlokes over here is based on a deed that the first Mishnah is, we learned that the first Mishnah, to us, we're saying, why can't we just say that the Chamisha is 5 of the 7? The Rebbe will point out that from the Mishnah, we have to say that it is actually only 5 gates over there, in the language of the Mishnah over there, as the Rebbe will explain at the end. But before that, the Rebbe is going to explain now that the Chlal, this is not a question in facts, how many gates there were. This a question really is, what has the status of a gate? The varies different. What meets the criteria of a gate? Do only 5 meet the criteria of a gate? Do only 7 meet the criteria of a gate? And once we'll know what the criteria of a gate, then we'll see that how that Mishnah says that 5 gates, they watched it, is really saying only 5 met the criteria of the gate. Let's look inside. Dalet. But when those verstehen behagdim, hakushi in Lashon Mishnah, we'll understand this by first asking a question in the language of the Mishnah. In that second Mishnah, it says Shiva Sha'orim Hoyu Ba'azora. Tells you about the 7 gates. And then the Mishnah goes and enumerates all the 7 gates. Why does it have to tell you the number 7? About the Mishnah Rechem Tois Al Shiva Sha'orim, since the Mishnah already enumerates over there all the 7 gates, Shar Hadelek V'chulu, it tells you the name of all the 7 gates. So Levavos is the Tana Magdim. Why does he introduce first Shiva Sharim Chulu, that there was 7 gates? What is the number that you'll count? V'Shreina Shas, as the Gemara usually asks the question, is Minyan Olamali. What do we have to say the number? Why do you have to say 7? Count it, you'll see there's 7. What we're trying to say over here, the Rebbe will explain, is that 7 meet the criteria and have the status. It's not just entranceways. It could be a lot of entranceways. But we're not talking about entrance. There was 13, there were more entranceways. We're talking about there are 7 gates, status of gates. Those was this that we find many views, opinions. How many number of gates were in the Azorah? Whether there were Hey 5, whether there were Zion 7, Whether there were Ches 8, whether there were Yud Gimel, there was 13. He says, this is not a factual disagreement how many entrances there were. How many gates, how many entrances there were there. Because we have a rule, as in the Chaycha Plukte Mitzias, it doesn't apply. You can't say disagreement. Facts, you can't argue about facts. According to all opinion, there were 13 gates there. The Mishnah, as quoted in the Mishnah. The machloikas besteht in them, people from the Gimel Shorim, how much of these 13 gates have Madim Shar? When we say Hama with the 5 gates, 7 gates, 12, what is a Shar? What qualifies to get the law of a Shar? It either Hey have a qualification, or Zayin 7, 8, or 13. Hey Zayin Chesoyitim. What do we need to know? What's a Shar? We need to know with regards to mezuzah if it was chayv and a mezuzah. You're not chayv mikdash. You need to know whether you got a guard there. Only gates you have to be guarded. You have to know when your entrance. You're only chayv your entrance to a gate. Let's look inside. The nafkamina tzvish the shorim was hom madim shar. What different practical difference is whether it has the law of a shar. When the other shorim and the other gates which don't get the status of a shar is the gates come in yon malacha. That is important to several matters in halach umehem them. Aleph, the negates of Shmiras HaMikdash, as far as guarding the Mikdash, so we need to know what's a gate. It's only those gates that have the status, the law that they consider a shar. You got to guard the base. Number 2, when the gate should be a Mikdash, entering to the Mikdash. The Megate Arayin Mikdash need adin shar when there's a necessary to enter. If you go into the Mikdash through the gates that don't have the status of a gate, Kemen Zogunas as Nidarachbiyah, you can say that's not the usual way to enter. So sometimes the Torah doesn't allow you to go into the Mikdash in the normal way. But if you went through another way, if it's not a gate, then it's not considered the Derech Shbiyah. And number 3, as the Rebbe points to the Gemara in Shavuos. Number 3, where there's Derech Biyah, that also take. And number 3, Benegate to Mezuzah. Actually, Mezuzah is possible. But if it has a status of a gate, that means that would be Chayv Mezuzah if there would be a Chayv Mezuzah in the entrance to the Azorah. Had we not have that special lesson that we learned, that just at a house that you have to put Beischol Misharecha, that it has to be a weekday house, not a hekdesh, not a holy house. So Avkol Shulcho Yotze Elushem Kodesh. So these are Kodesh. So Lepoimam should only need a mezuzah. But if we didn't have that limud, which gate qualifies for a gate that needs a mezuzah? Well, given the din, so then the halacha would have been as Davke di Shorim was Hob Madin Shar Zainen Mechuyev mezuzah. Only if they have the law of a shar, then you're obligated mezuzah. The pasuk says, "Uchsavtom amezuzah b'sechu b'sharecha." It has to be b'sharecha on the posts of your doors and the gate. So it needs to be a status of a gate. So it needs to be a shar. So here we have the question: what qualifies as a shar? Now we understand why the Mishnah says there are 7 gates. Not, of course, you can see entranceways. The Mishnah wants to emphasize these are the ones that have the status of a shar. The Far is the Mishnah Magdim, and that's why the Mishnah introduces Shiva, Sha'orim, Hoyim, Azor. 7 gates. That is to establish as no dizim Sha'orim, only these 7 gates, und nicht die andere, not the others, shar. They have the definition and the law of a gate. There says another possible thing is that he says 7, you need them all together. Just by the Orem Miklat, the Kedusha of the Orem Miklat is only the Sheish Orem Miklat. It needs to be the 7 gates in order for any of the gates to be qualified as a gate. Can say another thing. We can also say similar, another idea why the Mishnah introduces Shiva Shorim. Similar to what our sage blessed memory say about the pasuk, Sheish Ore Miklo Tiyema. There should be 6 cities of refuge. So they say Achiyu Shoshtom Shishtom Koltus Keachas. They need to all be functioning. They should all need at the same time for functioning. That's when any one of them would absorb those who killed somebody accidentally. You need all of them to be functioning. So is our matter. With them, with the extra language that there were 7 gates were in the Zorah, is the Mishnah Meram, is the Mishnah hints, as the Allah Sha'orim and Ein Mitzias, that all of them are one entity. Und Oibs is the Tod that full of Mispar von 7 Sha'orim. If there isn't the full number of 7 gates, is Evzeinit Chal, the Din for Shar HaZorah. Then it doesn't apply to them the gate of the Azorah at all because we don't have 7. The Tzarech Shmira Chulu that you would need Shmira for, you need all the 7. That's why the introduction. It's another hint for it. Okay. So, now that we're saying that this mission is coming to establish to us what qualifies as a shar, those was Rava Zoktanoihi. That what Rava says is a machloikis. He says our Mishnah says 5. There's a certain nita plukta mitzias. So he wasn't talking about a practical, that there was only 5. How many actually gates there were. But the plukta, the disagreement is biful from the Shorim Hobmatin Shah. How much of those gates have the law, the status of a Shah? Those was the Tana from the Erste Mishnah Zok, as the Shmira is given nor al Chamisha Shari Azor. The fact that the Tana says that you only watched 5 gates of the Azor means to say even though that practical, there were 13 gates. Is valishitosei, because according to his view, habunor di chamisha sha'orim gahat adin shiyashar. They had the status of a shah. Not, we'll see soon how we know that. It's not because we only put on 5. There could be 7 had the status of a shah. See soon how we know that. It's not because 7 had the status of a shah and only we put on 5 of them. But when he says, he holds, we'll prove that in a minute. Ahagam as when you gimel is valishitosei of nord chamisha shorim gata din sha'ar un chamisha have made. When he said that they were 5, what he means to say is not there were 5 entrances, but sha'orim mitadin sha'ar, that there was only 5 that had the laws of the sha'ar. Aber der Tana von der zweiten Mishnah sagt Shiva Shorim hoye b'azorah. He says 7. Halt, he's of the view as Shiva from the Yimul Shorim that 7 out of the 13 have Madin Shar have a Din Shar. The mail is if they all faranachim shmira, therefore on all 7 there's an obligation of shmira. And those was the shmira is given lois al chamisha shari azorah. So why did they watch only on the 5? Is Valtrei Menoil Shiva, we didn't need Shiva. Was das main need as is ein mit Mechuyev Shmira. Not they're not obligated, nor with the Rambam is Masbir. As the Rambam explains, they're obligated to guard them. They're Shorim, Shiva Shorim. That's what the introduction is. Shara Koinim Shem the Masara Meken, because since they're already guarding on the Shara Meken and the Shara Mitzvahs, this haste, the Tzvei Shorim Zan Shem Shemurim to the Kohanim. Which basically means they're already being guarded through the Kohanim, so you don't need to guard. So the Rebbe is saying that when it says in the first Mishnah that the Shmira was al Chamisha Shari Azoris, is like saying to you, there are only 5 gates that require Shmira. Doesn't yet fully answer, because one can argue, yeah, it's Chamisha Havu, they were 5. Why do we have to say there were 5 gates? The Rebbe says it means there were 5 gates. Why can we say 5 of the gates needed Shmira? The Rebbe is going to prove it a little bit later, weiter, more. But the Rebbe in the meantime says the Midbar Tech Musbar Dosus Mikim Fregna of Loshon Al Fanabba also answers another problem. The Rambam says that they're guarding the gates, but the Kohanim guarded the places and the gates were guarded. Let's look aside. The Musbar does us we can fragen Eifel Loshen Hanal from Rambam that we can ask on the above language of the Rambam in Sefer Yad Chazor. What does the Rambam say about Chamisha Shari Azora? Why did they guard the 5 gates of the Azora? Shari Kohanim Shemrim, because the Kohanim were guarding Al Shara Meket. It says the gate of the Meket. But Al Shara means the gate. The Kohanim didn't actually watch the gates. They watched in the houses, in the base. Why does the Rambam say Shara? The Shmira from the Kohanim is doch nicht given by Shara. They did not stand by the gate of the Meket, or Shar HaNitzis, and the gate of the Nitzis. Nor bebeis HaNitzis, bebeis HaMeket. In the house of Nitzis, the Meket. There steht the Mishnah. The Mishnah says the Rambam allein bringt this mit der halachas früher. The Rambam himself quotes it a few halachas before. And was is the Rambam Meshan and schreibt, why is the Rambam change and writes Al Shara Meket Al Shara Mitzvahs on the gate of the Meket and the Shara Mitzvahs. The Fia now is das verstandig, based above it's understood. The meat is the Rambam Madgish, the Rambam emphasizes here, as euch die zwei Sha'arim hob madin Shar. He's telling you there also, they're Shar. Shiva Sha'arim, or b'meil zan zeh mechuyev in Shmira. They're obligated. You got to watch them. Und those was the Levim seine nicht Shemer of Zeh. And the reason why the Levim aren't watching them is weil durch the Shmira from the Kohanim, because when through the guarding of the Kohanim in the house of the Mitzvahs and in the house of the Mekid, seine Shemer derech Mamelo Shemrim al Shara Mekid Bashar Mitzvah, watch the guard. But you have gates here that needed to be watched. Those haste. Which means in the din shmiri bebeis hamekid, beis hanitzut, and France we did. In the guarding of the beis hamekid, beis hanitzut, there are 2 halachas. Aleph the chiv shmiri mitzadam bais. You have to watch it because it's a house. Azevi beis avtinas. That didn't have a gate. You have to watch it anyways. But those shachs to the Kohanim, that belongs to the Kohanim. Beis mitzad shorim was insane, but these had the gates in these. And base Meked base Hanitzis. Was das ist eigentlich Meked to Levim? That is mainly to Levim. But we bow as durch the Shmira from the Kohanim, the base Meked base Hanitzis, since through the guarding of the Kohanim, the base Meked base Hanitzis, is v'derech Mele Faran Shmira Eichev Shara Meked Shara Hanitzis. So by extension, automatically, there's also applied now. We have a guarding for the gate of the Meked, the gate of the Nitzis. The Levim that's why they didn't need to watch them. So you need to watch 2 places technically there, but the Levim were exempted through the watching of the Kohanim. Zay, Pikar now is move on. So based on the above, it's understood. Pavos Rav and the Rambam in Pirush HaMishnayos learned. Why does Rav and Rambam learn the Tana from the Erste Mishnah? The Tana of the first one is not Chamisha Shari Azora. But how neat with the Tana Shiva Shorim Hoyim Azora? He does not go along with the opinion. What is Rav's and what's the Rambam Pirush HaMishnayos? What is their view that the one that says that the first Tana does not hold that there were 7 gates in Azora? Even though also according to the other Tana, he also only watched 5 of the 7. But yet they say that the first minute says no, there was only 5 had the status. In only from the Mishnah read the Tana the Alam Mekoimes with the Kohanim Levim Gedarti. The beginning of the Mishnah, the Tana discusses all the places that the Kohanim and Levim needed to guard. This is the language of the Mishnah. B'shloisha mekoimes hakahanim shemrim bebeis hamikdash. In 3 places they guarded. In the beis haftinas, in the house of Haftinas, the beis hanitzitz, in the house of Nitzitz, beis hamikdash. And then the Levim were 21, chamisha shari azora, 5 on the 5 gates of the Azor. Thus haste. Der Tana der Mont Norwegen der Shmira durch die Kohanim. Over here, the Tana only mentions the Kohanim, the way they guarded the Beis HaNitzutz, the Beis HaMekid. That's the only Shmira. It doesn't talk about that the Shmira of the Kohanim extended to the gates of the Beis HaNitzutz and the Beis HaMekid. Und dennoch, wenn redt wegen der Schmire durch die Levim und die Schonen von der Azora, and then when he talks about the gates of the Azora, sagt al Chamisha Shana Azora. On the 5. So what happened to the 2? I'd over so sagen, as the Tana held Zayin Shorim Azora, if this Tana holds that there were 7 gates in the Azora, in other words, 7 qualifying gates, und is not of Hey Shari und die Schmire is not of Hey Shari Azora, and the reason why 2 of them don't get guarded is because 2 of them don't need to be guarded. But so it turns out, as in the mountain Ganzen, there is no mention. Even by him, of them is make it about the obligation of watching the guard of the nature and then shall make it. He mentions the 21, he mentions the 3 places, but doesn't mention those 2 places, the gates of the Nissan Mesa make it. We have to say that he holds that those was only 5 gates that met the qualification, and the gates of Shara Nitzis or Shara Mekah did not meet that qualification. And further, and this is also Baal Mekem Lemon Atana Davke Komar, since we can say he meant specifically, he said Chamisha, he means Chamisha. Upirish Dvar, and he was articulate with his words. Zokman Dochnitas says his Lam Davke Sosuchu. I'm going to say no. He said 5, but it's really 7. We don't say that. So we're going to say 5 means 5. The father learned the Rava and the Rambam, and that's why the Rava and the Rambam learn as the Tana Halt, as Chamisha Shorim Hoyil Azora, that there were 5 gates to the Azora. That Lois Chamisha Shorim, that only 5 of the gates, Hab Madin Shar, have the status of a Shar, Zainen, Mechuyev, in Shmira, and they're obligated to be guarded. The river in Sefer Hayad, with the Rambam Zog the Psak Halacha with the Dasram, the Sefer Hayad Rambam says the ruling as the majority rule. Ashiva Shorim Hoyula, that there were 7 gates, is a Medayik. Then he specifically said those was the Shmira. Is not al Chamisha Sharei Hazorah that it's on the 5. Is val the Shmira from the Kahanim is not the base Hanitzu base Hamekit like in the first Mishnah, not only the house. The day from Tanakama, as our Mishnah, the Derech Mamela Oich, Al Shara make it, Al Shara Mitzvahs. Kafter Vaferach, the Sichas Shabbos Parshat Borim, Tovshin Lamed Vav.